Did you know that the smallest state in the world carries, within its 44 hectares of territory, a history as complex as that of the Roman Empire itself? The origins of the Vatican are surrounded by mysteries that date back to ancient civilizations, martyrdoms of saints, and political disputes. But how exactly did a land outside the walls of Rome become the epicenter of the Christian faith? What is the relationship between Nero's Circus and St. Peter's Basilica? Get ready for a journey through time, where we will uncover secrets involving wars, pirates, controversial popes, and even conspiracies. What is hidden in the Vatican's origins may surprise even the most skeptical. The true origins of the Vatican date back to times long before its current status as the heart of the Catholic Church. Long before it became the epicenter of Christianity, the area we now know as the Vatican was home to a past filled with mystery, culture, and transformation, reflecting the cycles of history that shaped Rome itself. The story begins in the Etruscan period, around the 8th century BC, when the region where the Vatican is located was inhabited by an advanced and enigmatic people, the Etruscans. These people, whose influence over Rome is undeniable, would have called the area Baticus or something similar, a designation that may have evolved into the name we know today. Situated in a strategic location, the Etruscan settlement not only dominated the banks of the Tiber, but also served as an important commercial and cultural connection point between diverse communities. Even at that time, the region already carried an aura of mystery and sacredness, characteristics that would be deepened over the centuries. With the advent of the Roman Republic, around the 5th century BC, the area known as Ager Vaticanus began to play a secondary role in the Roman scene, being a rainy plain located outside the city's official limits. Although far from walled Rome, this land was a point of contact between the young republic and the powerful Etruscan city of Veii. The fertile fields of Ager Vaticanus made it ideal for agriculture, but it was also a land steeped in spiritual meanings. Some traditions suggest that oracular practices and rituals related to divination may have occurred there, since the term vaticinium, related to prophecies, echoes in the etymology of the name. With the arrival of the 1st century AD, Ager Vaticanus transformed from a peaceful plain into a scene of great activity under the rule of the Roman emperors. Among the most striking events of this era was the construction of Nero's Circus, a monument that, at the same time, represented the splendor of imperial Rome and the brutality that would come to define it as a place of sacrifice and tragedy. The history of Nero's Circus begins with Emperor Caligula, who reigned between 37 and 41 AD. Fascinated by shows and entertainment, Caligula chose the area of his mother, Agrippina's property, in Ager Vaticanus, to build a circus that could host grandiose events, like chariot racing so popular in Roman culture. The project not only highlighted Caligula's eccentric and extravagant taste, but also his ambition to expand spaces for public entertainment beyond the city's walled limits. It was during this period that the history of the obelisk began in ancient Egypt, where it was carved in the granite quarries of Aswan and erected in the city of Heliopolis, one of the main religious centers of the ancient world. There, it was dedicated to the sun god Ra, reflecting the divine connection between heaven and earth. For centuries, the obelisk remained in Egypt until the expansionist power of Rome claimed it as a trophy of its cultural and military superiority. It was Emperor Caligula, in 37 AD, who ordered the obelisk to be transported to Rome, a feat that demonstrated not only the young emperor's ambition, but also the logistical skills of the Roman Empire. Moving such a colossal structure across the sea and the Tiber River required a combination of advanced technology and human power. Upon arriving in Rome, the obelisk was installed in Nero's Circus, the same place that would later become the scene of Christian martyrdom. For Caligula, the obelisk was more than an adornment. It was a symbol of imperial supremacy and a tribute to the grandeur he sought to associate with his name. After Caligula's death, The project underwent a significant transformation under the rule of Nero between 54 and 68 AD. Nero, an emperor known for both his extravagance and his cruelty, completed and expanded the Circus, transforming it into a venue of private shows that reflected his incessant desire for attention and acclaim. Chariot races, with their speed and danger, were one of the emperor's favorite events, and he often participated as a competitor or enthusiastic spectator. However, Nero's circus also began to gain notoriety for darker events, which revealed the most brutal aspects of the Roman regime. In 64 AD, Rome was devastated by a colossal fire that consumed much of the city. The flames, which burned for days, left thousands homeless and destroyed entire neighborhoods. As the Roman people sought answers to the tragedy, Nero, facing accusations of negligence and even suspicions of having ordered the fire to carry out his urban planning projects, found a scapegoat in Christians, a minority group and widely misunderstood at the time. To divert attention from himself, Nero accused the Christians of having started the fire and ordered a relentless persecution against them. Nero's circus became the main stage of this campaign of terror. Here, dozens of Christians were brutally executed, their deaths staged as spectacles for the amusement of the crowds. Among the atrocities committed, Christians were crucified, burned alive, or thrown to the beasts, in an attempt to satisfy the Roman public's hunger for violence and spectacle and reinforce the emperor's authority. These events marked the place with suffering and sacrifice that, for many, symbolized the struggle and resilience of the first Christians. It was also during this period that Nero's circus became the setting for one of the most significant events in Christian history, the martyrdom of St. Peter. Leader of the apostles and one of the central figures of nascent Christianity, Peter was arrested and sentenced to crucifixion on the orders of Nero. According to tradition, Peter asked to be crucified upside down, considering himself unworthy to die in the same way as Jesus Christ. This act of humility and devotion transformed the place of his death into a sacred space for Christians. In the 4th century, the destiny of the Vatican was irreversibly transformed by the rise of Christianity and the pivotal role played by Constantine the Great. After centuries of persecution and marginalization, Christians finally found a powerful patron in Constantine, who, after his conversion, changed the history of religion and began the construction of one of the most iconic buildings in the Christian world, St. Peter's Basilica. Constantine, by recognizing Christianity as a legitimate religion protected by the Roman Empire, sought to consolidate his devotion and demonstrate his support for the nascent Christianity. In a gesture full of meaning, he chose the location traditionally associated with the martyrdom of St. Peter, leader of the apostles, to build a grand sanctuary. This decision was not only a leap of faith, but also a strategic political move. By erecting the Constantiniana Basilica in 330 AD, he not only honored the central figure of the Church, but also reinforced the alliance between Christianity and imperial power, consolidating the empire's new religious identity. The construction of the basilica was no simple task. The chosen location, which had housed Nero's circus, needed to be adapted to accommodate the imposing structure planned by Constantine. Engineers and architects faced significant challenges in leveling the land and creating a solid foundation for the building, especially since the Vatican region was situated in an unstable alluvial area. The work, however, was completed successfully, resulting in a basilica that became one of the main places of Christian worship at the time. The original St. Peter's Basilica quickly became a central pilgrimage point for Christians from across the empire. Faithful traveled from distant lands to visit the site, considered the tomb of St. Peter, and experienced the spiritual connection with the figure who represented the origins of the Church. The sanctuary became a symbol of the resilience of Christianity and the new religious order that dominated the Roman Empire. In the 9th century, the Vatican region faced one of the greatest threats in its history, when the growing power of Christianity was challenged by the violence and plunder of the Saracens Muslim pirates who terrorized the Mediterranean. This landmark episode not only revealed Rome's vulnerability, but also led to the creation of one of the first physical manifestations of what would become the Vatican's territory, the Leonine Walls. The year was 846 AD, and the Saracens, after a series of devastating sacks of Italian coastal cities, set their sights on Rome. Despite its inland location, the city was not prepared to repel such a bold attack. The invaders arrived via the Tiber River and encountered little resistance as they made their way to St. Peter's Basilica, which, at the time, was outside Rome's main defensive walls. The Basilica, built on the site of St. Peter's martyrdom, was already one of the most important centers of Christianity, housing sacred relics and treasures accumulated over the centuries. The attack was brutal. The Saracens invaded and plundered St. Peter's Basilica, destroying altars and taking sacred objects of priceless value. The sacrilege committed was a devastating blow for the church and the city, exposing not only Rome's military fragility, but also the urgent need to protect the sacred places that symbolized the Christian faith. Although the most precious relics, including the remains of St. Peter, were saved, the psychological and cultural impact of the looting was profound, echoing throughout Christendom. Faced with this trauma, Pope Leo IV took decisive measures. Between 848 and 852 AD, he ordered the construction of a system of fortifications that would surround St. Peter's Basilica and the surrounding areas. These walls, known as the Leonine Walls, not only protected the basilica from future attacks, but also physically defined the boundaries of what would later be recognized as the territory of the Vatican. The construction of the walls was a monumental work for the time. Using stones sourced from ancient Roman ruins and employing local workers and soldiers, Leo IV oversaw the creation of a fortification that stretched nearly 2 miles, with strategically placed towers and a series of gates that could be easily defended. Around the basilica, the area was transformed into a citadel that could withstand future attacks, protecting both the inhabitants and the spiritual treasures of the church. When the walls were completed, Leo IV formally consecrated the new perimeter, transforming it into sacred territory. This act not only reaffirmed the church's commitment to protecting its most precious assets, but also laid the foundation for the idea of the Vatican as a geographically defined and politically autonomous entity. For the first time, the space around St. Peter's Basilica was not just a place of worship, but also a symbolic fortress of the Christian faith against external forces. In the late 9th and early 10th centuries, the Vatican plunged into a dark period of political disputes, intrigue, and scandal, marking one of the most turbulent times in the history of the Church. This moment of crisis, encapsulated by the infamous judgment of Formosa and the period known as the Pornocracy, revealed not only the moral and political fragility of the institution at the time, but also the complexity of the relations between the Church and secular power. The episode of the Judgment of Formosa, which took place in 896 AD, is one of the most macabre and surreal events in papal history. Formosa, who had been pope between 891 and 896, was a controversial figure. He had faced accusations of political ambition, questionable alliances, and participation in regional conflicts, factors that brought him into conflict with powerful factions within the church and among the Italian aristocracies. After his death, it was thought that disputes relating to him had finally ceased. However, less than a year later, his successor, Pope Stephen VI, literally dug up Formosa's corpse for a posthumous trial. Known as the Cadaver Synod, Formosa's trial was held in the Lateran, where the Pope's decomposed body was placed on a throne and subjected to charges of perjury and usurpation of the papacy. A deacon was appointed to answer on behalf of the corpse, while Stephen VI conducted the trial with unusual ferocity. Formosa's body was declared guilty, his acts as pope were annulled, and his remains, initially mutilated, were thrown into the Tiber River. This act, in addition to being grotesque, revealed the depth of the political and moral crisis within the Church, which was deeply divided by rival factions and external influence. The impact of the Formosan judgment was devastating. The Church suffered a major blow to its moral authority, being widely criticized by both the faithful and secular rulers. Pope Stephen VI himself met a tragic fate. Months later, he was deposed, arrested, and ended up strangled in prison. The event symbolized the growing instability of the papacy, which was increasingly becoming a pawn in the hands of Roman aristocratic families and foreign powers. This instability paved the way for the period known as the Pornocracy, which extended from 904 to 964 AD. During these 60 years, the papacy was largely controlled by powerful women from the Roman aristocracy, especially the Theophylact family. These women, often mistresses or wives of popes and political influencers, exercised significant control over the Church, manipulating papal elections and administrative decisions to suit their interests. Pornocracy was marked by deep corruption within the Church, which undermined its spiritual authority and caused outrage among the faithful. However, it was also a reflection of the complex relationship between the Church and secular power, especially at a time when the boundaries between the two spheres were blurred. Aristocratic interference in the papacy not only destabilized the Church, but also highlighted the need for reforms that would later shape its structure and function. Despite the chaos, the Church managed to survive this turbulent period, gradually emerging with a greater focus on the centralization of papal power and independence from secular influences. The events of the judgment of Formosus and the Pornocracy, although dark, shed light on the Church's vulnerabilities and served as catalysts for changes that would shape its trajectory for centuries to come. The 14th century witnessed one of the most controversial times in the history of the papacy: the transfer of the Church's headquarters to Avignon, France. This event, known as the Babylonian captivity of the Church, not only altered the geography of papal power, but also reflected the political and spiritual tensions that shaped medieval Europe. The decision to abandon Rome and, later, the return to the Vatican are chapters that reveal both the vulnerabilities and the resilience of the Catholic Church. The story begins in 1309, when Pope Clement V, pressured by the complex political circumstances of his time, transferred the papal headquarters from Rome to the city of Avignon in southern France. Rome, during this period, was plunged into political and social chaos, with rival aristocratic factions competing for control of the city. This unstable environment made it difficult for the Pope to exercise his spiritual and administrative authority. Furthermore, Clement V faced strong pressure from the King of France, Philip IV, with whom he maintained a close and, at the same time, delicate relationship. Avignon, although situated outside formal French territory, was under the control of a close ally of the king, offering a safe haven for the Pope and his court. The transfer was initially seen as a temporary measure, but it quickly became permanent, lasting almost 70 years. During this period, 7 popes resided in Avignon, transforming the city into an administrative and political center that rivaled Rome in influence. Although the stability provided by Avignon allowed the Church to reorganize its structures and strengthen its administration, remaining in the city began to generate significant controversies. Many believers saw the Pope's absence from Rome, the traditional seat of Christianity, as a betrayal of the Church's spiritual roots. This feeling was compounded by the perception that the popes in Avignon were under the direct influence of the French monarchy, compromising their independence and universality. Critics of the time, such as the Italian poet Petrarch, did not hesitate to compare the period to the exile of the Jewish people in Babylon, giving rise to the term Babylonian captivity to describe the papacy in Avignon. Meanwhile, Rome suffered from the absence of the papacy. The city, once the center of Christianity, has become a fragmented space, with its churches and infrastructure in decay. The Pope's absence also affected the local economy, which depended on the flow of pilgrims and the papal administration. Pressure for the return of the papacy to Rome was growing both among the faithful and among secular leaders who recognized the symbolic importance of Rome as the seat of the Church. The return of the papacy to Rome was finally accomplished by Gregory. However, the return was not easy. Rome was still in crisis, and political instability remained a constant. Furthermore, the transition was marked by tensions within the College of Cardinals itself, which was divided between pro-France and pro-Italy factions. Around 1506, under the pontificate of Julius II, the construction of a new basilica began. Once, as the centuries passed, the Constantiniana Basilica began to show signs of deterioration. The original structure, although monumental for its time, has been affected by the passage of time, political instability, and changes in architectural and cultural priorities. The new St. Peter's Basilica, built on the foundations of the previous one, involved some of the biggest names in Renaissance architecture and art. Bramante was initially tasked with the project, conceptualizing a grand structure that reflected the Church's ambition to consolidate its spiritual and temporal authority. After his death, artists such as Raphael and Michelangelo took central roles in the development of the basilica. Michelangelo, in particular, left his unmistakable mark, designing the iconic dome that has become one of Rome's most recognizable landmarks and a symbol of global Christianity. The construction of the new basilica was not only an artistic endeavor, but also a reflection of the changes in the power and influence of the Catholic Church. During the 120 years that passed until its completion in 1626, the Vatican established itself as the heart of Christianity, attracting pilgrims, religious leaders, and artists from around the world. The transition from Basilica Constantiniana to today's St. Peter's Basilica symbolizes not only the continuity of Christian tradition, but also the Church's ability to reinvent itself to face the challenges and opportunities of each era. This period also gave rise to the history of the Sistine Chapel during the pontificate of Sixtus IV. Between 1477 and 1480, he ordered the restoration of an ancient chapel known as Capella Magna, located in the Apostolic Palace. The objective was to create a space worthy of religious ceremonies, which reflected the growing power and prestige of the papacy in the Renaissance period. Under the supervision of experienced architects and artisans, the chapel was rebuilt with proportions inspired by Solomon's Temple, a symbol of spiritual connection with Judeo-Christian traditions. This restoration included not only the physical structure, but also the initial decoration of the walls, carried out by some of the most renowned artists of the time, such as Sandro Botticelli, Domenico Ghirlandaio, and Pietro Perugino. The paintings on the walls, completed before Michelangelo's arrival, depicted key episodes from the Old and New Testaments, including the giving of the tablets of the law to Moses and the baptism of Christ by John the Baptist. These works reflected the Church's rich theological tradition, but they also showed how the Renaissance was redefining religious art, with an emphasis on humanism, realism, and narrative complexity. However, it was at the beginning of the 16th century that the Sistine Chapel reached its peak glory, thanks to the contribution of Michelangelo Buonarroti, whose incomparable talent transformed the site into one of the greatest artistic achievements in history. In 1508, under the papacy of Julius II, Michelangelo was called upon to paint the ceiling of the chapel. Although initially reluctant, as he considered himself more of a sculptor than a painter, Michelangelo accepted the challenge and dedicated 4 years, 1508 to 1512, to creating a work that would forever change the course of art. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is a visual symphony of biblical narratives, beginning with the creation of the world and culminating with the fall of man and the promise of redemption. Among the most famous scenes is the creation of Adam, which shows God reaching out to give life to Adam, an image that has become a universal icon. Michelangelo, working in extremely difficult conditions, lying on improvised scaffolding and facing physical and mental exhaustion, used his genius to create figures of unprecedented dynamism and emotion, combining perfect anatomical technique with a spiritual depth that transcends the barriers of time. 3 decades later, Michelangelo returned to the Sistine Chapel at the request of Pope Clement VII to create another monumental work, the Last Judgment, which adorns the altar wall. Completed in 1541, this massive fresco depicts the second coming of Christ and the Last Judgment, with a striking contrast between the salvation of the righteous and the damnation of sinners. The work, which generated controversy at the time due to its use of nude figures and emotional intensity, is a powerful meditation on mortality, sin, and divine hope. In addition to being an artistic triumph, the Sistine Chapel plays a vital role in the life of the Catholic Church. Since its construction, it has become the place where cardinals meet in conclave to elect a new pope. The connection between the grandeur of the art and the spiritual process of choosing the leader of the Church is a testimony to the deep meaning of the chapel as a sacred space. And so, the Vatican reveals itself to be much more than a simple symbol of the Christian faith. The Vatican is a place where history and faith meet in a unique way. Its origins, marked by persecution, martyrdom, grandiose constructions, and periods of crisis, reveal much more than the religious symbol we see today. But what impressed you most about this journey? Was it the story of Nero's Circus? The construction of St. Peter's Basilica? Or perhaps the infamous judgment of Formoso? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you want to take another dive into history, click on the screen to see more about ancient Rome, its entire history from the beginning to the fall. There are always more historical secrets waiting to be revealed.